Joining me now is commentator and best-selling author Douglas Murray. Douglas, the first and only debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is just hours away. The Veeps team has been desperately trying to change the agreed-to debate rules. If you were advising the Vice President, how would you tell her to approach this clash?
Well, I mean, she's got several problems on her hands, hasn't she? Because on the one hand, she's got to make sure that she says absolutely nothing. And she's quite good at that, it has to be said. But she has to say absolutely nothing because we know that many of the policies that she would bring in, as Bernie Sanders admitted this week, would be pretty radical and would put off the public. At the same time, there might still be some journalists in America and elsewhere who will notice that she has to say something. I suspect that what she's going to do, and what her advisors will have told her to do, is to try to trap Trump. And they will do that by getting her to do something like the shtick she did in the last debate when she was running for Veep against Donald Trump and Mike Pence. And you remember she kept saying to Mike Pence, "I'm speaking." Excuse me, but I'm speaking. And it was a very clear attempt to sort of say, I'm a woman, I'm also a woman of color, and therefore, if you in any way not just interrupt me, but counter me, you're kind of countering a woman of color. And, steady on there. Don't you realize you're not allowed to do that? I don't think she'll use that technique, but I bet they've come up with a new one that's equally irritating and equally designed to effectively trap her opponent.
And it will be something that the media absolutely love, and they'll promote it as a massive win. And yet the rest of the viewing public, not all of them, but many of them will find irritating. Now, what does Trump have to do to get in her head? Should he try to throw her off, pose questions the debate moderators are not asking? Or is he better off just saying as little as possible and letting her talk?
Well, it's a very interesting one, this. I mean, everybody sort of has ideas of how to do this. And of course, very few people have actually been on the presidential stage or had a debate with these kinds of stakes. I think that it's very interesting watching Trump in recent weeks as he's clearly been advised, stick to policy. And as he said at one of the rallies the other week, the Democrats have been very, very personal against him. And how could he resist getting personal in response? That said, it's an extremely difficult conundrum for him. Getting personal, if she gets personal, and I think she's bound to, getting personal is kind of inevitable. And if he was to, as it were, rise above it, he might well annoy a lot of his base who will say, we want to see you pummel her effectively. So it's a very, very tricky situation he's in. This is why, of course, the Democrats have put her forward. It's meant to sort of snooker Trump. Nevertheless, there are two very good lines of attack that he could do. One is to actually ask her to get specific on any policy, literally any policy, Rita. It could be anything from education to foreign policy, taxation policy, absolutely any key policy. And just get her to give any detail on it, not to say the importance of education is something we must remember. And that's why education matters. And let's all think about that for a moment. Don't let her do any of that. Actually ask her some detail. That's the first thing he could do. The second thing he could do is ask her how she squares this circle of this campaign is about fixing America. And yet I'm proud of what Joe Biden and I have accomplished in the last 4 years. There is a disconnect between those two things. Can he tease out of her what her real thinking is? We'll see.
That's a very good point, because not only has she been part of the Biden-Harris administration. We've had the Democrats in power 12 of the last 16 years. So this continuous, there's a better way, the change we desperately need. Well, how long do you need to actually implement it? We are getting finally a few policy positions articulated on the official Harris campaign website. And Douglas, she wants to provide a pathway to citizenship for migrants who have crossed over the border illegally. This is in stark contrast to Donald Trump, whose policy is to enact a massive deportation initiative to get rid of illegal immigrants from the country. How do you think this is going to play out?
You know, this has played out so many times in America in recent decades. When you have a completely porous border, there is always this temptation for people to say, why don't we put a pathway to citizenship for people who are in America already? And instead of having them work in the shadow economy and the black market and so on, let's bring them in, make them taxpayers, make them citizens and so on. In one way, this is a perfectly reasonable argument. On the other hand, it's absolutely lethal. Because what it does is, after the millions of people who've already broken into America through the southern border illegally, it simply encourages more to come. Why? Because it says, you know, you just got to get in, you'll get everything that you need, and you'll eventually be actually a citizen. In other words, the crime of breaking into the country illegally will effectively not be judged to be a crime, and there won't be any punishment for it. The problem about this is, and it's the same problem that Europe has been going through, it's the same problem Britain's going through, it's the same problem that Australia has been challenged by in the past, as you know, although Australia has been one of the relatively sane countries on this. The problem with it is not the people who have already come. It's the millions upon millions of people who would like to come, and who, the minute that you make that pathway from being an illegal who breaks in to being a citizen, and the minute you make that pathway that easy, it's just millions upon millions of people who will want to follow in the footsteps of those people. So it's always there, this idea, the pathway to citizenship, it's always there as a temptation for politicians, but they leave for their successors a bigger and bigger nightmare.
Absolutely. You're just creating more pull factors. You're putting more sugar on the table, as they say. And I do wonder whether Democrats would be so keen on this path to citizenship if they weren't counting on these new citizens voting for them. Perhaps they're miscalculating there, but I think in the past they've been fairly safe in thinking these new migrants who've been effectively awarded for crossing the border illegally will support us with their vote. Now, illegal immigrants are causing all sorts of serious issues for people across many towns in the US. It's not just those border towns anymore. We've had armed Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment buildings in Colorado, to thousands of immigrants from Haiti being placed in a little town called Springfield, Ohio. This is a town with a population of less than 60,000, Douglas. And the mayor there says they've been overwhelmed by 14 to 20,000 migrants that have been brought in by authorities. The locals have had enough.
I really challenge you guys to get out here and do something. These Haitians are running into trash cans. They're running into buildings. They're running into... they flipping cars in the middle of the street.
Douglas, the locals there are not getting to the services they need because they're being overwhelmed by these new migrants that have arrived. And when you think about the numbers, a town of less than 60,000 to suddenly have anywhere between 14 and 20,000 new people placed in it, you can understand why they're overwhelmed.
I mean, I've seen this so many times in so many other Western countries, Rita. It's exactly the sort of thing that happened in Sweden since 2015. It's exactly the same thing that's happened in towns in Germany and elsewhere. And it's always the same story, is that the locals say, we can't put up with this. And central or local government says, tough luck. You're going to have to. And I think this is profoundly immoral on the part of politicians. I think it's a wicked thing to do. The first duty of politicians is to look after the interests of the people who put them in power, the voters. It's not to make sure that everyone in Venezuela who wants to flee and break into a condo flat gets the right to do so. And I think it's an unbelievable offering up of responsibility, abdication of responsibility by politicians. And as I said earlier, they leave a much bigger mess for the people coming after them.
Absolutely. Now let's move to the UK. The BBC's Israel-Hamas coverage is said to have breached the broadcaster's own editorial guidelines over 1,500 times. This is according to a new report compiled by a team of lawyers and data scientists. Douglas, they analysed some 9 million words of coverage across several languages and different platforms. The question has to be asked, why does the BBC have this deeply worrying pattern of bias against Israel?
It always has done. I'm slightly surprised that they've been found to have only 1,500 breaches of their own guidelines in recent months. I'd have put the figure rather higher than that. There was a report some years ago into the BBC's anti-Israel bias inside the BBC, and the report was never released. And I suspect, as many other people do, that it's because it came to the same conclusions that this report has come to. You can absolutely smell it in Broadcasting House. There's a straightforward editorial line on the Israel issue, which is that the BBC believes that Israel always is in the wrong and can do no right. And its coverage is grossly unfair. It has been for years. And I think this is something that should be addressed. I mean, you see it in headline after headline, day after day. The BBC will report things from effectively the angle of Hamas. It happened recently with the issue of the four hostages who were killed in captivity. The way in which the BBC reported this, it was as if the Israelis had killed the Israeli hostages. It was as if the Israeli Prime Minister had killed the Israeli hostages. The whole onus of the coverage was as if there was an Israeli mistake or error or Israeli intransigence that had caused it. And the coverage did not acknowledge the fact that in most civilized media entities, as well as societies, it is deemed to be wrong to break into somebody else's country, break into their house, kill their citizens and kidnap them, then hold them in tunnels for almost a year and then shoot them in the head. Most people would regard that as being on the people who did it. But oh, not the BBC, because you can always find Jeremy Bowen or another of their correspondents always taking the side, always of just anyone who's anti-Israel. It's an endemic bias in the BBC. It's completely sick. And of course, they're welcome to do that. If they want to just be a pro-Hamas, anti-Israel channel, they can do that. But there's a caveat with them, which is that they're not in the free market. They're not in exchange of free ideas. They're paid for by the license payers, by the taxpayers in the UK. So that's why this matters. It's not like The Guardian. The Guardian can do what it wants. This is the national broadcaster. And so I think that a better standard should be expected of them and indeed demanded.
Now, before you go, Princess Kate has just in recent hours released a video announcing she has completed her chemotherapy treatment.
To have finally completed my chemotherapy treatment. The last 9 months have been incredibly tough for us as a family. Life as you know it can change in an instant, and we've had to find a way to navigate the stormy waters and road unknown.
Douglas, she also speaks about looking forward to being back at work and undertaking public engagements. It's a beautifully shot video, I've got to say. It has astonished royal watchers. I love it. I think we should have more communication like this. There was so much secrecy around her treatment, and she's now coming out and sharing it all with the world.
Yeah, it's the first time I've seen it. It certainly looks very glossy, but it's a happy story at a time when we need happy stories. She's been a remarkable figure in public life ever since she first entered public life. Unlike some people we could think of, she's been extraordinarily devoted in her work. And I hope that her return to public life, I think it will be seen, it'll be welcomed enormously warmly by the British public and others. She's never put a foot wrong since she became a public figure. She's in one of the toughest jobs in the world in a way, because if she's in one of those positions where if you scowled once, you'd get a lifelong reputation for being a grump. And so it's wonderful that she'll be back. The royal family's got rather too few working members at the moment, so having one of their absolute A-list royals back is good news.
And she's shown such enormous grace, because the couple you haven't mentioned, Harry and Meghan, have poured all sorts of vitriol her way and her husband's way. She knows she can't respond. She just has to keep a dignified silence, which must be enormously difficult, but she's done it. She's done her duty, and we thank her for it. Douglas Murray, thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.